Thank you, President Bryan. We missed a meeting last week, and I could tell that there was no meeting last week from the conversation going on today. Everybody's, I think, glad to be back. Since we did miss, I will mention that Jerry McNeil spent some time in the local hospital over here, 2 or 3 days while we were out. But Jerry's here and doing much better. Good to see you back, Jerry. The upcoming programs next week, I believe, is March the 2nd. Kim McMillan, a candidate for governor, will be our Democratic candidate for governor, will be our speaker. The program shows that Mike McWhorter is our speaker March 9th. Right now, March 9th is open. March 16th, FFA High School program, Paul Richardson's program. March 23rd, Bernard Childress will be here, TSSAA Executive Director. The State High School basketball tournaments will be over, and he will be speaking about those as well as the football playoff back last December. March 30th, pending is Zach Wamp, a Republican candidate for governor. April 6th, pending is Bill Haslam, Republican candidate for governor. April 13th, confirmed Lieutenant Governor Ron Ramsey. April 20th is open. April 27th is Rick Roberts, entertainer. Jennifer Taylor gave me that name. He will be probably one of our best programs of the year. May the 4th, Mike McWhorter has confirmed. So those, we said we'd get the gubernatorial candidates here. We're still working on a couple, but that looks like it's going to materialize. Some of them naturally are playing games and want to know who they're following, want to know if they could be on the same program with one of the candidates, things like that. But the schedulers are working with us, and I think we'll have all of the candidates here at one time or another. Interesting program today, as I said, last week was canceled. Unfortunately, Roy Lawler was still available. This program came as a tip from Marcia Everett, who's a member of the Tullahoma Sunrise Club. And I think Roy was there to speak with them some time ago. And he's not at the head table, but he's just kind of blended in with our membership, and appreciate him being here and being able to come back today. Roy was born in Miami, Florida, attended college at Boston Conservatory of Music. While in Boston, he was a freelance French horn player and performed with many traveling artists such as Henry Mancini, Johnny Mathis, Suzanne Summers, Ray Charles, and many others. He moved back to Orlando, Florida in 1986 and opened his own brass instrument repair shop. He worked for Walt Disney World as a recording musician and did many conventions with them. He and his wife Tish moved to Decatur, Tennessee 4 years ago, and then moved to the metropolis of Flat Creek, Tennessee 1 year ago. And he said he would fill us in on more details as he came to the podium. Roy, we're glad to have you today. Look forward to your program. Thank you very much. I will say, I think reading between the lines, Roy is the leading trumpet manufacturer for the leading musicians in the United States, living in Flat Creek, Tennessee.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you very much for your hospitality. The lunch was wonderful, and appreciate you inviting me. We are custom builders. I say we, there's just my wife and I. We've really scaled our business down to so that we are hands-on. To give you a little bit more background, I originally am from Miami, Florida. I was born and raised there as a third-generation Floridian, so I'm actually a native Floridian. But moved out of Florida when I went to college, and that was, as you said, with at Boston Conservatory of Music. I lived in Boston for 5 years. While I was in Boston, not only was I playing and performing in school, I apprenticed with a man who did instrument repair. And he taught me how to do brass instrument repair. That's all he did. He didn't do woodwinds or saxophones or flutes or anything like that, strictly brass instruments. So I worked on instruments from as large as tubas down to small piccolo trumpets. But I learned fabrication and how to machine just by doing it. I'm not a trained machinist. I'm not a trained fabricator. Only by the grace of God and the man I apprenticed under, he showed me how to do it. He hated to do tubas, work on tubas, so I got to work on the tubas. I was a tuba expert by the time I left there. Overhauled and reconditioned many old sousaphones, which are the marching tubas, and but amongst that, just really, I was fairly mechanical. Always worked on cars and things with my father when I was younger, so I had a good mechanical aptitude. So I picked up on it pretty well. After finishing and leaving Boston, I moved back to Orlando, Florida. Some people ask why not back to Miami, Florida, but Orlando, Florida in 1985 was a wealth of, or a big pool of musicians there because of Walt Disney World. There was several other parks, attractions that had live entertainment, so I felt it was really a place to be in order to further my craft and offer a service. At the time we opened, we were called Florida Brass Instruments, and we did repair and customizing on all brass instruments. After that point, got to know some of the musicians and mostly trumpet players, and they're always looking for a better mousetrap. How can I make the instrument easier to play so I can play higher, louder, faster, whatever, more endurance, that sort of thing. And you wouldn't think that there's a whole lot that you can do to a brass instrument, but all of the things that pertain to violin and guitars, where the difference in wood and material, it's the same with trumpet and brass instruments. So we have different types of metal that we use to get a different type of sound, and I'll go into that a little bit later. I've got some examples here to show you. But basically, I worked with a lot of trumpet players there, and that's the second question a lot of times people ask is, why do you make trumpets instead of French horns? And since you were a French horn player, well, French horns are pretty complex, so I thought, well, I'd start with the trumpet first. And since I had a sounding board of good trumpet players, we had probably some of the best trumpet players in the nation there at Walt Disney World. We started making custom components, different parts of the trumpet that they could change, and it would enhance the way they play. The second thing was that we were able to build what they want, not what I think the trumpet should play like. So we were really custom building for the player, whereas a lot of manufacturers build something that they're usually come from trumpet players. The company's owned by a trumpet player, so therefore they make a trumpet like the way they want it to play. So we really just push the issue that we want to hear what trumpet players have to say, and in making their instruments better. So we started with the components, and this is usually a progression that most manufacturers will take. They make a component first and change, just like some auto manufacturers or auto specialty companies make a special part to make it go faster or more horsepower. Same thing, we made parts. And then after that, a couple of years after that, we said it was very successful, so we decided, well, we'll come up with our own product. And we started making our own trumpets, and we serial number each trumpet. The serial number we can reflect back on to find out what that trumpet, when it was made, what components we made it with, and just basically a timeline. Excuse me. We now have over 1,200 trumpets that we've made in the 25 years. This is our 25th anniversary. We have picked 5 specific models that we're going to make this year that are anniversary editions that will be limited. And we have, at this point, already have had 2 people come forward wanting those anniversary models, just because they will be hand engraved with a shield on them, just dedicating the 25th anniversary, and they will actually say that they're built in Flat Creek, Tennessee. We have, and I'm going to come to the major question, why Flat Creek, Tennessee, in a moment. But we actually have instruments now that we've made in Orlando, Florida, which we were really in a town called Longwood, Florida, which is just outside of Orlando. And we have instruments made in Geneva, Florida, when we moved our business to our home. That sort of set up the premise that we could have the business just about anywhere. I'm one of 3 custom builders in the country, so we were able to make our market niche. We make what's called commercial style trumpets. Those would be trumpets that players would use in a recording session, mostly commercial music, which is a big band, jazz, that sort of thing, although we do have some symphony players playing our instruments, but we mainly cater to those freelancers and players that do a lot of different types of music. So that was our market niche. We were successful in catering to that type of player, and we have a lot of repeat customers, believe it or not, that would come back for the new models when we introduced a new model. But basically, when we moved it to our home in Geneva, we lived on 5 acres in a very rural area. We had a little shop there and that sort of set up the plan that we could just basically be anywhere. They're going to come to us, and thankfully for the internet, a lot of our business does come from the internet. We have a website. We ship instruments all over the world, and that's been a great gift to have the internet, because people will generally go there first for some information if they've heard about us, because before the internet it was just word of mouth, and as each player told another player, they would contact us. But the internet's just sort of expedited that type of word of mouth. So basically, after we moved to Geneva, we were there for about 3 or 4 years, and we decided we really wanted to go to Tennessee. We loved Tennessee. We had visited, my wife and I had visited Tennessee, and we're flatlanders. We love the mountains, and we just thought it was beautiful. So we basically certainly prayed about it, thought about it. It was put into motion. We'd start looking around at a place. We happened to be the time now 5 years ago, the housing market in Florida was booming. We put our house on the market. We had a contract in less than a week. We sold our house and we moved to Decatur, Tennessee. So now we have instruments that we built in Decatur, Tennessee. Oddly enough, it wasn't planned, but in Decatur, Tennessee, 2 of the 3 trumpet builders are in Decatur, Tennessee. It was me and another guy named Cliff Blackburn. It just worked out that way, but we were good friends. We've known each other for a long time, and he caters mostly to classical players and orchestral players, but for the most part, we got along real well, and it was really nice to have someone we knew in Decatur, Tennessee. But the reason that we moved to Flat Creek, Tennessee, although it was a beautiful home on a ridge, we could see mountains, we could see the Smoky Mountains, it was not because Decatur's not a beautiful spot. My wife and I when we left Florida, we were in a church that has an expositor preacher. And an expository preacher, does anybody know what an expositor preacher is? Well, it's a line-by-line preacher-teacher. It's kind of like the way they used to preach, maybe. Some people say that. But we were we were looking for one. We couldn't find one. In fact, our pastor in Florida told us you won't find one. But I think he was being a little bit, he just wanted us to stay. But we prayed about it a lot. God sold our house there in Florida, so we moved to Decatur. We couldn't find one. We visited many churches. We were actually being fed by Precept Ministries in Chattanooga. Kay Arthur's, my wife and I both took the courses there and did a lot of the study there. But we heard this preacher through a youth conference in Chattanooga. We weren't really, we knew some other preachers at the conference that we were familiar with. We weren't going for the preaching and hearing God's word. And this one preacher got up and started preaching, and we were just amazed. And we found out his church is in Tennessee. It was in Shelbyville, Tennessee. So we looked him up. His name's Jonathan Sims. We came to hear a preaching right at the church and see and visit the church. This was back in October of last year, actually the year before, that'd be 2008. And so we just lifted it up to the Lord. Lord, if you can sell our home in a really bad time to sell a home in Decatur, that we would move to Shelbyville, Tennessee. So we continued to go to church there for 4 months, 2.5-hour drive every Sunday to go to church in Shelbyville. We would have continued to do it even if he hadn't have moved us. But we put our home up on the market. We and we knew that it was in God's hands, and in 30 days we had a contract. I still get very emotional about that because it's just the time. You know it's the Lord when you're doing something that He calls you to do. So it was a little bit tricky. The lady that wanted our home had to sell her home. So there was the catch. And she was in South Carolina. There was no doubt that she loved our home. In fact, we started a very good relationship with the people. They stayed over one night just to stay in the house and have fellowship with them. But it kind of droned on for a little bit, and we just left it in the Lord's hands. Nobody else was looking. We had a few tire kickers, come and look at the house. But to make that long story short, by the grace of God, the week before she phoned us on the sort of drop dead time with her contract, she said, "I just don't know. I'm not having anybody come to look." And about 2 days later, she called. She said, "Someone's coming to look at my house." Well, needless to say, it all worked out. She sold her house. The week after that, now this doesn't happen on the best of times, she closed on her house on a Wednesday. We closed on the house she bought from us on a Thursday, and we bought the house in Flat Creek on a Friday. And the title company told us that never happens, even in the best of times where there's got to be something going on. But anyway, we praise God for it. We've been in the church now for a year. We just have been really blessed by our pastor, and so that's why we moved to Flat Creek. And the bonus was it's in Flat Creek. We just love it there. I'm not a hunter, but boy, if I was, every time I go to back and forth on my road, there's turkey and deer and you name it, it's out there. But we live up on a hill. It's called Hilltop Road, and we have 18 acres there. We have a couple of horses, and we're not big farmers, but we just enjoy the land. But our business we brought with us. There was a time there when we were closing on the houses, on all the house deals, that we were literally without a home. Everything was in the truck. Everything was in the big giant moving van that we rented, the shop, the house. So, we just put it in the Lord's hands that if anything, whatever happens, happens. We'll either stay in this truck or we'll be in Flat Creek. But it all worked out. We finally took several weeks to get the shop up and running. We're now up and running full force. It's just a little 1,000 square foot shop, but it's packed, and we probably have 1 million pounds of machinery because we've moved it several times, but we've gotten really good at it. So, but we hope that, and if it's God's will, we'll stay there. We love Flat Creek, and the church is wonderful. So that's the reason why we're in Flat Creek. But now back to the instruments. Over the years, we've built instruments for the U.S. Army Herald Trumpeters. Those are the trumpeters that do all the ceremonial work at the Capitol, in the White House, and also in the Capitol building, where they're the ones that will stand with the banners hanging down. When any dignitary comes along, they always give them fanfare in the red carpet as the President and the First Lady stand on to greet them. So we've built those trumpets for them. We've built trumpets for probably wouldn't be necessarily household names to most of you, but a lot of recording artists. Some you would know would be Wayne Newton. Believe it or not, Wayne Newton plays the trumpet. Most people may not know that, but he does play it a little bit. But we've done work for all of the I would say a fair amount of the lead trumpet players and a lot of the groups that travel. As far as our product line, we make trumpets, cornets, and flugelhorns. Does anybody know what a flugelhorn is? Probably not, huh? Well, the flugelhorn is an instrument that is a trumpet player doubles on. And I'll pull out some of these here so I can sort of explain to you. I'll show you the trumpets first, and then we'll... One popular configuration is called a C trumpet. Now, most of the time, these instruments are used by classical players because they're pitched in C, and most of the writings of the music is in C. This one happens to be one we built back when we were in Geneva, Florida, and it has what's called a bead-blasted 24-karat gold finish on it. It has shiny parts, the shiny gold versus the satin gold, it was a real popular finish in the 40s, and it sort of came back. Finish on trumpets and musical instruments is almost like clothes. They go in and out. Gold now has gotten very expensive, so it's kind of on its way out. Since the rise of gold prices, it actually affects the gold plate prices. This instrument is made entirely out of brass. It's not my cell phone. I don't have a cell phone. This is another B-flat instrument, and this B-flat trumpet's in raw brass. There's no coating on it. That's why it looks dull. And now, believe it or not, probably 80% of the trumpet players like this finish. Now you'd say, why? It looks old, and that's why. They want it to look antique. They want it to have some kind of mystique to it, so they oftentimes get it this way. This instrument actually came back for us to put a finish on it. We built it for the trumpet player in the Cirque du Soleil in California. We also have the trumpet player in the Cirque du Soleil at Disney World. They're the Canadian group that has a show that runs pretty much full-time in Orlando and out in California. I think there's one in Vegas too. But oftentimes this is the way they'll go out. Oftentimes I don't get to meet the player. We'll talk on the phone, we'll figure out what they want, and we build it. And then we send it for them to try. They'll send it back in this raw state. We'll send it to him to try it, and if there's anything we need to change or move, which that's why this one came back. He wants some of these things moved more correctly for the way it fits his hand, so we do that. But the primary components of the trumpet are the bell, which is this shape here, obviously, and then this section right in here called the lead pipe. That's where they put their mouthpiece in. It will greatly affect the way the instrument feels and sounds. Mostly sound is in the bell section, different rates of taper in the bell, the size of the bell, the material of the bell, the way it's constructed. All of that pertains to sound. Then this lead pipe section, the first tapered section, is the way it blows and feels. Then there's a cylindrical section, just round tubing. That's the bore size. That'll also determine how it feels, how much air it takes to blow, and whether efficiently they can play up high or low, or all of that. So by altering these tapers and shapes and materials, we can make the instruments play a certain way. The most popular finish we put on a horn now is something we introduced a few years ago called scratched or brushed lacquer. This is kind of, you've probably seen doorknobs and things have this brushed or antique look on it. Well, that's what I got inspired by the doorknob to put this on a trumpet. But they like it because if they have any chemical reaction, like turning your hands green from touching brass, or some people are allergic to brass, this coating will keep you from that. It keeps it, and it makes it look antique. So this has been a very popular alternative in finish to gold and silver, and the raw brass finish for players who like that antique sort of look. We state on our website that we build trumpets for the glory of God, and each one of the trumpets are stamped PS1, and PS1 stands for Psalm 1. And I would encourage you, if you don't know Psalm 1 or haven't read it, then basically if you go to your Bible and read Psalm 1, that will give you a good idea of where we stand on our production of the trumpets. Both these trumpets are B-flats, and then we have the C, and I'll show you the flugelhorn. Flugelhorn is an instrument that trumpet players use. It's pitched in the same key, B-flat. They use it as a double instrument, and mainly because of its difference in sound and makeup. But the flugelhorn is a much mellower, softer, warm sound that jazz players will use it. It's used as a sort of a color instrument in certain arrangements and stuff, but 9 times out of 10 you see a big band. Every once in a while the trumpet player is going to put his trumpet down, pick this up and play it because it gets a nice mellow full sound. It's kind of a bridge between the trombone and the trumpet. It just falls right in there. This instrument is made out of brass, yellow brass, and has what's called a red brass bell. It actually has a higher copper content in it, and that's mainly for sound production. But you can see the differences in how large and different the tapers are, and that's what gives it its characteristic. They have a little trigger on here that alters tuning pitch for certain instruments if they're playing with them. Some instruments have naturally flat and sharp notes, and they need to be able to get there, so they use the tuning devices. But we manufacture all of our parts with the exception of the pistons and casings of the instrument. They're actually made for us to spec by a company up in Wisconsin. We've been working with this particular company for quite a few years, and they're wonderfully consistent. That's a part that is pretty labor intensive, so we have it, and it's repetitive. It's the same part over and over again. So we have it made for us so I can keep my manpower down to a minimum, and pretty much we warranty them for life, the instrument. Is there any questions? Does anybody have any questions about instruments?
You touched on it briefly, but like if you get a set of custom-made golf clubs, you gotta wear that out. And I can imagine you can probably wear out a piston so they would come back to you, but I would think, what possesses somebody to want another trumpet when they buy one? And obviously they made a big investment. It's not like you're going to wear out.
Well, some people will wear them out. It's not across the board, but your acidity in your system and salts in your system, even though brass is pretty resilient to it, and we actually use a gold brass tubing in the inner tubing, which helps fight that corrosion. But what happens to a drawn tube, just a thin wall tube, is over a period of time, it does what's called dezinkification. The zinc's pulled out of the brass because it's copper and zinc. And what happens is when the zinc's pulled out, you've left with copper, and copper is extremely corrosive, so you end up getting holes. So they'll actually, because of the high salts in your system, in your saliva, and you're blowing it through the horn, even in your hands touching the horn, we'll get horns where guys, about every 8 to 10 years, they need a new horn because they've either worn through it with their hands, they've worn through a tube or a pipe, which we can patch, and I've got some guys that have patch upon patch on their horn. They just don't want to get rid of it until they have to. And usually we change components, but still in changing components, people get so used to the way the instrument plays, they don't want to change components. But they do wear out. There are some, but usually they'll last a lifetime, yes. I would say trumpet players, like I said at the beginning, they're always looking for the better mousetrap, if they can, just something to make them more ease of playing. If some of them I say, well, you need to practice. Well, is there anything I can have you can do that I won't have to practice as much? But and it is a lot of times when they start evaluating horn to horn, they see how much easier ours play in comparison to what they have possibly, or it has just the sound and blow that they want. But there are some that I almost call them the Trumpet of the Month Club. About every time we come out with a new model, they'll keep their old ones. They just want the new one. There's some just collect. They just like doing that. And a lot of my customers are professionals that play day in. That's their living. And most of those guys stick with one trumpet, and they can't afford to go and buy a new trumpet every year. But a lot of my customers are doctors and lawyers and just people do it for fun, and they just want to get the best that they can. And we're in a price market that we're not the most expensive custom builder and we're not the cheapest custom builder. We fall in a real affordable range, and it's a custom built. One of our custom built trumpets can range as low as $1,900 up to whatever you want to spend. So really, just to get something good, they can spend an average price of what they do on one that's mass produced.
How would let's say the $2,500 be an average figure?
About that, between the 22 and 25.
How does that compare to like an off the rack model that you buy a high school band player, for example?
Well, we're actually the mass produced models are getting close to our price. But I don't want to raise my price if I don't have to, and we're not going to as long as material stays, because we want to remain affordable for that musician, and that's why a lot of guys come to us, because they can get a horn that plays as well as. I'll be honest with you, the custom builder in Decatur, his instruments start out at $5,000. They start there. The custom builder in Oregon, his least expensive horn is $8,000, and they go up to 15 and 20. But we just make traditional stuff the way they should be, just trumpets. A lot of guys will come to us because they don't want the sort of faddish, fancy, all this, a lot of the other, trumpet's pretty much a trumpet when you make it. It's what you hang on it and all that sort of thing, that some of those are different because of that. But we make trumpets and flugelhorns in a real traditional style, and it's almost like it's on a bell curve, just almost like everything else. Everybody gets kind of hyped up about this new thing, then they come back to the middle. Then there's this other thing, and they come back to the middle. We're in the middle. It stays consistent because we're always in the middle.
I was just wondering what inspired you to go from a player to a maker? Do you still play?
I don't play anymore. I'm hoping, well, at least if it were up to my wife, I'd be playing in church. But playing a musical instrument, wind instrument like this is physical. So if you don't do it, it's almost like running. You got to start over. You have the basic concept down of how to play an instrument, but basically your endurance goes and that sort of thing. So I don't play as much anymore because I'm so involved in building and trying to keep up with that. And but I think I met a lot of my goals when I was younger. And actually, I did not finish school at Boston Conservatory because my idea to go to school was to get my applied performance degree and get a job. Well, I got a job playing and touring halfway through college. So I just said, well, I'm not going to burden my parents to pay for 2 more years of college and just go and work, because that was the idea going. It happened to hit just right in Boston. A lot of the Boston Symphony players were retiring. They were just filling spots to fill until they could do auditions to get. So there was a lot going on at that time, and I just was able to work. But then once I got to the point of running my own business with the repairs and then doing my own instrument, even when I was in Florida, I had to start to decide, because as a freelancer, you need to be available. And I think there were times when I turned down too many times, they stopped calling you. So I just made the decision that I do this full time.
What is the source of your material? Where's the brass come from?
Well, we use really 2 different types. The solid stock will come in lengths, different diameters that we make the solid parts, the braces. I usually buy from several different sources because sometimes the people that make our valves for us, I'll go in with them because they have much more power buying material. We'll go in and buy that from a source. The sheet brass and material like that, same thing. I'll go in with another maker or either a buyer who buys a large quantity. I can buy from them a little cheaper than having to buy. If we buy this tubing here, it comes in lengths. Some manufacturers required you to buy 150 feet of it. Well, that would last us quite a long time, but we need more than just one size. And we can buy one size, and we can do what's called redrawing it, resizing it to the sizes we need. But it's better if we can buy a large quantity of it at a good price to keep our price level down than having the option of redrawing it ourselves. We can do it when we need it to do it, but we'll buy the tubing and such already sized and ready to go. The rest of the forming, the other formed parts like the lead pipe and the bell section, those were all redrawing that to our spec. So,
Is much brass produced in this country?
yes, you have to be careful because even though you're pulling from a familiar source, and that happened to us one time. We were getting some brass in that I said, this looks a little different, but I'll use it. And what happens is when they go through these forming processes, they get work hardened and they get vulnerable to acidities in your system because some of the zinc will get pulled out in the hardening process. And we were having a problem with this particular section of the horn, the lead pipe, because it gets all the acids and salts first as you're blowing through it. It would start to dezincify. Well, we remedied that whole thing by going with a gold brass, which is impervious. Nickel and gold higher copper content brass is more impervious to the red rot or dezincification. So we stand, if that ever happens on any of our horns, we always replace it.
So what kind of process do you use? Do you solder or weld?
Yes, all of that. We do soldering, soft soldering, brazing, which is the hard joints, all of the joints that hold the thicker pieces of metal, like these little braces here, the flanges and such, the braces holding anything a harder piece to a softer piece, and is a high tension area, is going to get brazed. And then the tubing is just like you would do plumbing. All of these joints to connect the tubing is soft soldered. The bell material and the process of making the bells, there's 4 different processes. We have a seamless bell, I have a seamed, a 1-piece bell, a 2-piece bell, and then we have a electroformed bell. Now the electroformed bells, we purchase blanks from a plater that plates them up on a mandrel, and then but we don't use them too often. We usually keep to those processes in-house because they're much more, they make the biggest differences, and they make we know how to do it, so it just makes more of an issue of control there. Anybody else?
Roy, can you show us the difference in the sound of the 2 horns, please?
I can,
We sang
as best I can.
in honor of the Super Bowl Saints, when the Saints go marching in 2 weeks ago.
I don't take requests, but you get what you give.
Yeah, what-
That's pretty much just this is what's called a rose brass bell. It has a little bit more of a warmer sound to it compared to this one. It's a much tighter sound, brighter sound. It's always going to tend to be a little more coming at you. Now the Flugelhorn takes a different mouthpiece. Just a much more mellower sound. And like I say, that's where usually mostly jazz players will play it, because it's just very mellow. It's better in a small room. You'd probably rather listen to this 10 minutes than you would one of the trumpets, so a lot of times they'll switch over and do that.
Didn't Chuck Mangione?
Mangione, yes. He
Make that very famous.
Yes, very popular Flugelhorn.
Miles Davis played some games.
Miles pretty much stuck to the trumpet, but he did play Flugelhorn once in a while, yeah. In fact, the model trumpet that we build the most, that we modeled after the company that made Miles Davis's trumpets, called the Martin Company. They've since gone out of business. And it's really been unfortunate, the progression of where the music manufacturing industry has gone. All of the major manufacturers, the large manufacturers, they may or may not be familiar names to you, but Kahn and King and Bach and Armstrong and Pearl and all of them, and Martin and Holton and all those old companies that have been around since the turn of the century and even before, are now owned by one company. Steinway owns them all. So they're really having some of them have been discarded. Holton's gone, the Martin's gone. They've closed those plants down in Wisconsin, and they've moved them all to a big factory in Eastlake, Ohio. It's the most up-to-date factory that they had. So now they're having identity crisis. So does the Bach come from the Eastlake factory? Is it still in Elkhart? Or, the name recognition, the branding is still there, but of course the influx of the Taiwan and Japanese instruments, Yamaha and Jupiter and a few of those others, were the result when they came on the markets in the 70s, just like the automobiles did. A lot of the older companies that were smaller companies, like the F.E. Olds company and the Reynolds company out in the West Coast, basically said, we're not going to compete with making a cheap instrument. The family's old, we're just going to shut it down. So a lot of those companies just went away. Wurlitzer and a few of the others that made instruments just went down because they didn't want to compete. But now it's just kind of it's in a flux right now because it being owned by one major corporation, and a lot of them have shut down and they've moved everything to one production area. So I don't know what it's going to, I mean, it's been somewhat of a blessing to us because now they don't get, when you call a big company now, you don't get the personal attention. Half the time they don't even know their own products. They call a dealer, and then when you call a dealer, you get maybe a high school kid that reads the specs off a page, doesn't really know what, you know. So we've seen a lot of that. A real blessing this year, because we were affected by the economy too. Let's face it, you know, trumpets are expendable if you're not going to buy it. If you got to pay the bills, the trumpet budget might have to be used. But we were still busy. We were still working. But at the end of this year, we were blessed with 3 military contracts. We built 37 instruments for a guard band, Army band up in Fort Knox, one in Alabama and Birmingham, and one in Concord, North Carolina. So that was really a blessing. And the military orders are really great. In fact, I don't want to toot my own horn, but you may thank me. When they first ordered the horns, the military did, they wanted them all gold-plated. And I had a hard time with that. So now, wait a minute. I'd love to have the business, but that's my tax dollars. Do we really need gold-plated trumpets for the military groups? And because oftentimes it comes across as one big bid through a dealer or something. So someone said, well, how about gold? And they might have meant lacquer, or they might have meant, you know, this to some people looks like a gold trumpet. So I called each individual band and asked them, I said, and do you really want gold plate, or are you just saying you want to go? Well, 2 out of the 3 bands said there's no reason for us to have gold instrument. We only made 8 in gold plated because these I give them, if you buy gold, it's going to last the longest. There's no maintenance. It's really, from a longevity standpoint, it's good for the instrument. But we only made 8 out of the 35 horns in gold, and the rest were either in this finish or silver plate. We're working on the last one, and that's going out to Fort Knox. So,
Who's your favorite trumpet player?
well, let's see. You know, I can't answer. I'm surprised I can't answer that question. I mean, everybody probably knows Wynton Marsalis is a very popular name, and I love his trumpet playing. But like I said, I'm not connected to the trumpet as a player as much as I am, you know, what the trumpet players want. So,
Roy, we sure appreciate
Sure.
the program. You've been with us.